Hi, everybody. Welcome to Your Move, where we help you make better decisions and live with fewer regrets. I'm Stanley, and I'll be your guide. And today, we're talking about the two topics you should never discuss at the dinner table: religion and politics, neither of which are emotionally neutral topics, right? But put them together, and well, it's usually best just not to put them together. But in the current political climate, I thought, why not? So stick around. Who knows? I may be saying what you've been thinking right here on Your Move. Last spring, and depending on when you're listening to this, spring of 2021, we were coming out of COVID yet again. You know, we keep coming out of it and then dropping back into it. We had just finished up a very contentious, as you know, election cycle. And the way this impacted me personally, if I can be personal for just a minute, I was so grieved and so disappointed, and I would even use it, I don't even know if this is an appropriate word, I was just embarrassed by the behavior and the language of a lot of high-profile Christian leaders and high-profile pastors, bloggers, and radio personalities on both sides of the political aisle. In fact, I was so bothered by it, I decided to write a book. And that's not normally how I write books, but I just felt like I just have to at least I have to rant a little bit, and then it got longer and longer and longer. And I called the publisher. I said, hey, I just feel like I have a message, and maybe this is just my opinion, but I have a message for Christian leaders and pastors specifically. I think that and it's kind of a we thing because we're one body, regardless of what kind of church you're a part of. Paul said, hey, we're all the body of Christ. If you slap me, I'm not going to have your hand arrested. I'm going to have all of you arrested, right? Because the hand's part of the body. So this can't just be me pointing my finger. It's like, hey, we have the church has a problem. So anyway, the book came out. It's called Not In It to Win It. And I want to remind us of a couple of things that we need to be reminded of as a collection of local churches as our nation gears up for another round of, I don't know a better word, crazy, okay? Because it's about to get politically crazy again. And that's okay. And I love politics, and I love the conflict, and I love all that stuff like some of you do. Some of you hate it. You just want it to go away. So it's a part of our national pastime. It's a great thing that we have free speech, which, gets amped up sometime to the point where we're not sure it should be so free. But hey, it's way better than the alternative. So I'm not against any of that. But as Christians, as Jesus followers, we have a specific responsibility that we can't abandon, even though we all have widely held and strongly held political views. Throughout the 2020 and 2021, we suspended services for almost a year, right at a year. We stayed connected in small groups and in driveways. We did stuff in the community. We baptized, we did weddings, we did funerals, we gathered outside. We continued to stay together, and people still criticize me specifically, and really you as well. Hey, you shut down your church. I'm like, we were not shut down. We just did different stuff because we wanted to be good neighbors, because the hospitals were full, and the issue wasn't what do we think about COVID and all these things. The issue is, what is our reputation in the community? Because our reputation matters, because we're trying to impact our community. The other thing that we tried hard not to do, and you helped us and me not do this, we didn't politicize the church. And there were people in our various churches, I've talked about this, who wanted me to politicize the church and get up, take a stand, because the feeling was that we had caved into political pressure. And, in the state of Georgia specifically, our governor didn't impose political pressure on churches, but when our church and some other large churches suspended Sunday morning services, he was very grateful, because, a church like ours or large churches, could be super spreaders. So anyway, here's kind of get to what we need to talk about. And this is just a general principle. When life is predictable, and when life is kind of wrinkle-free, and we have some wrinkle-free seasons where everybody's healthy and everybody's employed and things, when life is predictable and kind of wrinkle-free, it is easy to lose sight of, and this is true of all of us, it is easy to lose sight of what we value most, and it's also easy to lose sight of what we fear most. But when a tsunami of uncertainty comes rolling in, things get real quick, right? And this is important. Uncertainty does not alter our value system. Uncertainty exposes our value system. And during times of uncertainty, our reactions to the uncertainty give us away. Our actions don't tell the whole story. You've heard actions speak louder than words, and actions do speak louder than words. But even our actions don't tell the whole story, but our reactions to circumstances and things around us certainly tell the whole story. And so many people and so many Christians' response to the political, social, and economic and health crisis of 20 and 21 exposed in these Christians and these church leaders what has actually been true all along. It didn't change their value system, it exposed it. And this sounds critical, and I am being critical, but we're part of the same body, and so this is part of our responsibility. Beneath some of that Bible-laced rhetoric and all those faith claims, there's actually a bit of a hidden agenda. An agenda that people outside the church have suspected all along. People outside the church suspect that we're just like people outside the church, that the same thing that drives them drives us. And the same thing that drives every ideological movement drives the local church. And at the end of the day, their suspicion is, and unfortunately, what too many Christians and Christian leaders tip their hat to, was what we value most is winning. And apparently, a lot of Christians and Christian leaders fear the same thing that every other ideology and every other group fears as well, and that is losing influence, losing our voice, losing our rights. And here's the irony, which is exactly what happens whenever the church abandons its Christ-ordained mandate. Whenever the church loses sight of our mandate as a local church, we do in fact lose our voice. We do in fact lose our influence. We do in fact lose our ultimate opportunity, which is to be the conscience of the nation. And so whenever the body of Christ in general or a local church loses sight of its Christ-ordained mandate, we in fact become a self-fulfilling prophecy. We lose the very thing that so many Christians feel like we need to fight in order to maintain. We're not here to win anything. And the church isn't here to win anything. And yes, there's a sense in which we're here to win hearts and souls. We're going to talk about that. But we are not here to win culture wars. And we are certainly not here to win elections. So in 2021, church leaders, and this has happened on both sides, the left and the right, this was the most amazing part to me, where I wanted to call some of my friends and go, what are you thinking, okay? Churches alienated half the souls. I mean, if the church is all about reaching people, souls, reaching souls for Jesus, you want to use some old-fashioned language, churches on the left and the right alienated half the souls in America through their un-Christ-like behavior and rhetoric and political fear-based posturing. And the one thing, we'll talk about this a little bit next time, the one thing Jesus was most concerned about when it came to future church was not our theology or our music or how we baptized or how we did communion. It was unity. He said, the unity of my people is ultimately the essence or the message of people believing that I was actually sent from God. So, the last couple of years, I feel like the church in general has missed an unprecedented opportunity to live and to react in contrast to the world around us. Too many Christians, and all of us to some extent are probably guilty of this. Me too, right? Too many of us did exactly, this is amazing, exactly what the Apostle Paul warned first century believers not to do. You ready for this? Now, if you think this is unrealistic for us, what I'm about to show you, you can't even imagine how unrealistic this was and sounded in the first century. He said this, do everything without grumbling or arguing. But wait a minute, that's un-American. A grumbling and arguing that's how you know I'm an American, by how I grumble and argue. I mean, how unpatriotic is this, do everything without? And the assumption behind this statement was there was something to grumble and to argue about. So Paul, come on, why not grumble and argue? Why not demand our way? What's the win in that? He says, well, I'm glad you asked. So that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. So, kind of dial us back in here a second. We've all said this or thought this. oh my gosh, what's happened to our country? What's happened to our country? We're going the way of this. We're going the way of that. In other words, what you're saying, you just haven't used this word. You're like, oh my gosh, we're warped. You know what warped is? It's out of balance. It's out of balance. It's out of balance. So Paul says, look, if you're concerned about your warped generation or your warped community or your warped culture or this crooked generation, he says, hey, church, I got some good news for you. You have the potential to make all the difference in your warped and crooked generation. But you're not going to make any difference by grumbling and arguing with everybody else. If you grumble and argue with everybody else, people are going to think you're just everybody else. And then he says this, and again, if we think this seems unrealistic, there's just no way to exaggerate how crazy this sounded in the first century. He said, if you get this right, then this is amazing. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky. The contrast will be so apparent and the contrast will be so evident, people will stop and stare. To use Jesus' words, Paul, he's one thing. Here's Jesus. He says, we are to, he's talking to his first century followers, let our light shine before others that they may see something different, that there might be, a differentiation, that there might be a contrast, that they may see our good deeds, not, imagine what we think on the inside, but see something on the outside and glorify our Father in heaven. And so watching all this fear and all this panic, I'm like, what has happened to us? And then I told you it's kind of a rant. Social media, watching pastors and Christians, and maybe some of you, right, demonize and criticize by name people you've never met, people you don't even have access to, people we don't even know. Okay, this is Christianity 101. We gave up the moral high ground. You know what we did? We confirmed what some of your kids and some of your grandkids and some of you, we confirm what the next generation suspected about us, that perhaps we don't actually believe what we claim to believe. Demonizing people in the other political party has sort of become an exercise in virtue. Now, if you're not a Christian, have at it, right? There's no rules for you. This has nothing to do with you. You can do whatever you want, right? You can be as mean as you want, use all the expletives you want, just have at it. It's entertaining, okay? But come on. If you are a Jesus follower, and if you are a pastor, and you have responsibility for the spiritual development of people, you have no business participating in any of that, even if you're convinced you're right, and even if you are right, because Jesus spoke to these matters and spoke to these issues. But I understand, we're standing up for the truth, we're not going to be intimidated. We're, demanding and protecting our religious rights. We're fighting the good fight. We are in it to win it, which honestly, as a man, as an American, as a human being, that sounds good to me. That appeals to me. We're going to win. We're going to fight the good fight. We're going to stand our ground. We're going to argue. And it sounds good. Until you follow Jesus through the Gospels. Until you follow the Apostle Paul from Greece to Jerusalem to Rome. So as un-American as it sounds, and as pathetic as it sounds, and as, passive as it sounds, the church is not here to win. Think about this. I know this is disturbing. We talk about it all the time. By every human measure, our Savior didn't win. He lost. He lost on purpose with a purpose. And we are his body. So like our Savior, we're not in this to win anything. We're in it for something else entirely. The Apostle Paul certainly understood it, right? The Jesus followers in Antioch, this is amazing. They were called Christians like you would call somebody a bad name. They were accused of being Christian. Wouldn't that be great to be accused of being Christian? Let's bring that back, right? They were accused of being Christians because it was so evident they weren't following Caesar and they weren't following the governor. They were partisans of a different king. They understood it. Peter understood it. And the gospel, changed. This is the thing I don't want us to lose sight of, that historically is undeniable. It changed the world. The gospel changes communities, it changes families, it changes cultures. Most of us would say, hey, it changed my life. Now, to be clear, I'm not advocating that we withdraw from the political process, just the opposite. You should be more politically involved. Everybody should vote. I mean, what a stewardship of opportunity we have. We aren't ruled by Caesar. We the people. Anytime you have an opportunity to vote, your law of Christ informed conscience, you should vote. Some of you need to get involved in local politics, state politics, maybe national politics, who knows? So lean into the process, okay? Don't withdraw, because we've been called to love and to care. So we have to do everything we can. We have to do everything we can to create and protect a culture of human flourishing, which is fueled by the love and care of God as we love and care in his name. But, and this is the jumping off point, and this is the point of demarcation. If you think, Andy, I think you're talking out of both sides of your mouth. I want to clear that up right now. Here's the issue. We should be extremely involved because we're extremely grateful for our nation. But our posture and our tone and our approach must reflect that of our Lord. Our posture, our tone, and our approach has been prescribed to us. You have the freedom to choose whether or not you follow Jesus, but you don't get to choose what following Jesus looks like, sounds like, acts like, or reacts like, because that has been prescribed to us as Jesus followers. The instructions are on the label. Now, in his letter to Christians, the crazy church in Corinth, the Apostle Paul describes his win. He uses the word win, okay? He says there is a win, but it's not the win the way the world understands and kingdoms of this world defines win. He says there is a win, and he tells us what his strategy for winning is. Now, he's the ultimate church planner. He's doing the impossible job of going into Gentile pagan cultures and not just talking about Jesus, but asking them to abandon this is impossible to imagine. He's asking them to abandon their entire, not their religion, their entire world view. He is inviting Gentiles to think differently about everything and everybody. So here's his strategy. It is so lame. It is so passive. It couldn't possibly work. And how did he do it? He did not go about it the way we are tempted to go about it, because he was not kingdoms of this world anything. He was kingdoms of God, the king that came to reverse the order of things and has invited us to follow. Here's the Apostle Paul's approach. It's disturbing, but remember this. It worked. He says this, though I am free and I don't belong to anyone, I have made myself a slave to everyone. Now, we see this word and we think of it figuratively. Remember, he's writing in a time when the entire economy of the world rose and fell on the amount of slaves, the ability of slaves to function, and the ability to purchase slaves. And when he wrote this, every single person, including Paul, every single person, except for just a handful of people, was potentially someone's slave. It wasn't ethnic slavery. It was poverty slavery. It was, hey, my husband died slavery. It was the crops didn't come in slavery. It's I didn't have any children to support me slavery. Everybody was a potential slave. So this was a really, really big deal. Owned and traded people. In fact, the Apostle Paul's grandparents or parents were probably slaves that had been set free. But in this case, he chose to look at this. I have made myself a slave. Wait, Paul, whoa. But like, to everyone? You said everyone. Like, even the people you don't like? Especially the people. Even the people you disagree with? Especially the people I disagree with. Seriously. He decided to place himself under, to serve under, to go second. But he had an agenda. This wasn't just to be a nice guy. He had an agenda. He had an others first strategy, an agenda that had been given to him by his king. Here's the agenda. Though I am free and belong to no one, I've made myself a slave to everyone to win. There's the win, as many as possible. So you're into winning. Yes, I am into winning. I'm into winning as many people as possible. And again, Paul's goal, it's impossible, was to win people away from a generationally ingrained worldview to a new way of seeing everything and everybody. How naive. How pathetic. I mean, what kind of strategy is that? Okay, let me get this straight, Paul. So this is your strategy. I mean, this is never going to work. You are going to submit to and serve people as a way of influencing people? Paul, dude, that's not going to work. You can't influence people by serving and placing yourself under them. That didn't work it's not going to work for you, and it didn't work for Jesus. Well, anyway, he continues. He says this. He says to the Jews, this is very confusing to us, to the Jews, I became like a Jew to when the Jews were like, Paul, dude, you are a Jew. What does this even mean? Okay, he's a Jew to us. He wasn't a Jew to him. In the first century, he wasn't a Jew. In the first century, he was a Hebrew from Tarsus. In the first century, Jesus was a Galilean from Galilee, from Nazareth specifically. In the first century, if you lived in Judea, you were considered a Judean or a Jew. So what he's saying is this, even though I'm from Tarsus, even though I was raised in a different culture, ultimately he ended up moving to Judea and he blended in with the Judeans who ran the temple. He said, when I'm around the Judeans who run the temple and have that very specific form of religion and very kind of buttoned up, he says, I've learned to play the game with them. He says this, to those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not technically under the law. But I can get along with people under the law. I can go along with that. Why? So as to win those under the law. To those who don't have the law, Gentiles, I became like one who didn't have the law, though I am not free from God's law. And then here's the kicker. Here's where suddenly his little story intersects with my story and your story. Though I am not free from God's law, what do you mean? You're talking about Torah? No, let me be clear. But I am under, let's say this together, Christ's law. One more time. I'm under, so let me get rid of the word Christ and go right to what it means. I'm under the law of a king. I'm under the law of God's final king, God's one and only anointed one. And my friend, if you consider yourself a Christian, you too are accountable to the law of Christ. And the law of Christ is very simple. You don't even need to write it down. There's not 10, there's just one. You are to love one another as God through Christ has loved you. You are to love the people around you. I'm to love the people around me the way that God through Christ loved me. That is the law of Christ. And Paul says, as I make my way into all these different cultures and interface with all these different people in order to win them over to a new way of seeing the world, I am under the law of God. I am under Christ's law. Here's why this is important. And Christ's law will determine my tone, my posture, and my approach. Christ's law, to love as God through Christ loved me, will determine my tone and my posture and my approach. I'm going to love others as he loved me. I'm going to one another, regardless of the political views of the one another's. I'm one anothering. Why, Paul? Oh, same reason. So as to win those not having the law. I said, come on, Paul, make up your mind. You just waffle. Whoever you're with, you're just a chameleon. You just blend in. Take a stand, man. Take a position. You can't stand in the middle. You got to be hot or cold. You can't be lukewarm. These are the kind of things that people threw at us pastors, 20 and 21. Anyway. So pastors who I'm talking about the pastors who refuse to politicize, come on, the ecclesia of Jesus. A refusal to, take a political stand was viewed as not taking a stand, but we did take a stand. Our stand was simple. We're not going to politicize the ecclesia of Jesus. We're standing for the posture, the tone, and the approach prescribed to us. We don't get to make this part up. Prescribed to us by our King. We're standing against alienating half the people in the United States of America by siding with one political party over the other. We chose to stand with Jesus in the lonely, messy middle, rather than capitulate to divisive, broad brush political talking points. Now, what he writes next is one of my favorite things in the whole New Testament. This is basically his mission and strategy statement he gives us next. Here it is. Ready? He says, I have become all things to all people. He says, I have learned to build and navigate relationships with people I have virtually nothing in common with, so that by all possible means. And then he lays out his mission, his great commission-informed mission. Here it is, that I might save some. Now, it's amazing, and I've said this before, that anything the Apostle Paul wrote survived the first century. But you know why it survived? It survived because he refused to bend to the prevailing worldviews of his day. In spite of everything going on in the world, he was convinced And he was convinced, this is amazing, that he held the moral and ethical high ground. And he didn't feel compelled to win something because, and you agree with this, he didn't feel compelled to win something because Jesus had already won, which means the world had already won. Paul's like, somebody just needs to tell him. So he set out to do just this. Here's how he wraps it up. He says, I do all this back and forth, blending in, figuring it out, influencing people. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I might share ultimately in this blessing. So I say we just keep doing that. Because when a local church or a group of local churches or the church in general, when the church becomes preoccupied with saving America, it has forsaken its mission. When a church becomes preoccupied with defending its own rights rather than advocating for the rights of other people, it's lost its way. The church we always look better when we're advocating for other people's rights rather than our own. I'll wrap it up with this. Tim Keller makes this extraordinary statement. He writes, when the church as a whole is no longer seen by the outside world as speaking to questions that transcend or go beyond politics, and when it is no longer united by a common faith that transcends politics, then, this is what we said a few minutes ago, then the world sees strong evidence that Nietzsche, Freud, and Marx were right. That religion, all religion, Christianity in particular, that religion is just a cover for people wanting to get their way in the world. Isn't that how your unchurched friends and family members see the church? It's just another ideology. It's just another movement. They just want their way in the world. They're just leveraging Jesus and the Bible to get their way in the world. And Tim is exactly right. When the church is divided and when the church is at each other and when the church allows itself to be subjugated to any other issue and any other thing other than the gospel, it looks as if we're just leveraging our religion in order to cover for ourselves and get our way in the world. So let's resist that temptation. Let's decide we're not going to do that. Let's continue to decide we're not going to do that. Every time you place your hand over your heart to say the Pledge of Allegiance, basically you advocate for what we're talking about. One nation under God. One nation, but one nation under God. God first. Our King first. Because our ultimate allegiance is to the King, the better King. And here's the thing. And you know this because you've experienced it, whether you had words or put words around it or not. Our uncompromising devotion to our better King will ultimately make America a better nation. It will ultimately make the world a better, safer place. Our uncompromising devotion to our better King will ultimately make America a better nation and the world a better, safer place. And we know that, not because we're projecting into the future, but because that's what history actually attests to. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure you check out the links on your screen for what to watch next, and check out the description below where we are going to provide you with free resources designed to help you make better decisions and live with fewer regrets. And again, thanks for watching.